Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Welcome to the second part of my conversation with one of River Cottage's linchpins. He's Stephen Lamb, often fondly referred to as the ham and cheese man, because he's the author of the River Cottage handbooks on curing and smoking, as well as cheese and dairy. Now, if you've not heard the first part of this conversation, I suggest you go back one episode. But in this second part, we're turning back the clock to when Stephen's fascination for charcuterie and cured meats began. So this is the area you ended up specialising in. You mentioned Ray the Butcher earlier. I think you ended up working with Ray a lot and ended up being drawn towards the whole kind of smoking, charcuterie, curing. Why was that the thing that really appealed to you?
Because Ray was a character and he was interesting. Ray was he was a policeman in the Met in the 60s, and the stories he used to tell me, I'm still not quite sure what side of the law he was on, but he left that industry and became a butcher. And for some people, they're making a link. But, you know, he just did that. And he ran a butcher shop in Dorset. And he was part of the original crew, part of one of the characters on the River Cottage series. And I found him totally engaging. He was a bit scary. He used to scare the chefs half to death. The Me Too movement had yet been applied to Ray, and so he was of a certain type, but he had a sparkle in his eye, and you had to earn his respect. And I said to him, "I really love this, Ray. This is kind of the beginning of cookery for me, butchery, going right back to the source, and learning how to do things." And he took me under his wing, and he was challenging. And I remember once in front of a lot of people at an event, I used to help him and I used to kind of preempt what he would do next. And at one point I preempted, and I think I must have annoyed him because I was probably getting in the way. And it was more about me knowing what he was going to do rather than him showing people. And in front of a room full of people, paying customers, he turned to me and he went, "Now look, I've taught you everything you know, but not everything I know." And I thought, oh my God, right? Here I am in front of a room full of people, I'm being told off, and I'm just trying to help. And I found myself saying, that's true, but I want to know those things that you know, and I don't. I'm committed to learning. And he thought that was a good response. And so he went, right, okay then. And then from there on in, he probably wasn't aware of it, but he was a brilliant teacher. And we got along famously, at work, because we shared a certain sensibility, and, I like that kind of teacher-student scenario. And he's no longer involved at River Cottage. He retired, and, I felt able to kind of carry on. And with the basis and the foundation of what he taught me, I just became really engrossed in this subject. It fascinates me culturally that throughout time, there's always been an element of smoking and curing going on, and it doesn't discriminate. You can be from an elevated civilization or an indigenous community in any pocket of the world throughout time. You would have had a product that you cured, smoked, or preserved. And these communities did not talk to one another. The internet had not yet been invented. It just happened. And, the Inuits make a version of salami in the Arctic Circle, and have done culturally for years. The Egyptians were making cured goods. The Aboriginals were making cured goods in Japan, where, I was talking about elevated civilizations, there are peaks. The Mayans were elevated at one point and they're no longer here. And the Romans were, but in Japan, one of the oldest known cured and smoked products is called katsuboshi. The commercial, more recent product is called bonito flakes. But it's katsuboshi is a piece of skipjack tuna that has been salted, smoked, and then hung. And it's one of the oldest known products. And it's fascinating for me because we know it's one of the oldest known products because there was a piece of apparatus created in order to deal with this old, stinky, hardened piece of once what was skipjack tuna, but now resembles a branch from a tree. And it's like a kind of truffle shaver. And we don't know who, and we don't know why. And I love that kind of element of it not being locked down. I love the science, I love the sorcery of smoking and curing. But at some point, somebody in the Japanese community went, that fresh sashimi skipjack tuna that we normally have, let's not have that today, lads. Let's have this. I've had this idea. And they create this thing. And they all must have thought that this person was the village idiot. Because after about a year, they took shavings of this old piece of gnarly skipjack tuna and they used it as a condiment on a freshly created miso broth, something that they make daily. And a whole new flavour opened up, which is amazing because who'd have known, right? First of all, who decided this was okay, right? How many people died in the process of this practice? This person or these people, we don't know who, has kind of understood the denaturing qualities of salt, the bacterial qualities of smoke and time and maturing and airflow and humidity and molds, or as food marketeers like to call them, blooms. And then the bit that really fascinates me is they've time traveled 12 months into the future, and they've understood that this product that they've never made in 12 months' time will taste in such a way that when they pair it with something that they make on a daily basis, it will create this third flavour. I mean, what the hell's going on there? Quite uncanny, and I love that. Normally I like things to be locked down, but I love the mystery, and that fuels my kind of appetite for learning more. And, it doesn't matter, we think about Italy, Spain, France, Eastern Europe, a place that geographically my nan would still call the continent, never left Manchester in her life, but she's an expert on the continent. That's where we look to for a kind of present day products like prosciutto, copper, salami. But you know what, Mark? These products have been around since time began. And I want to unlock that. It's cultural, it's geographic, it's proper terroir, born out of necessity, old, ancient, almost innate knowledge. And we're just tapping into that. Today, if I make my own bacon, or if anybody else makes their own bacon, they're tapping into that spirit. And, that's my place. That's what I like. And, I don't have to worry now about putting on a chef's jacket and thinking, I can't carry this off because I'm not a chef. When I used to do that, I used to look around me and people used to look like chefs. And when I put on a chef's jacket, I looked like a dentist. I just couldn't carry it off. So I don't have to do that anymore because I'm tapping into something much bigger, and that's where I'm happy.
Yeah, amazing. That's such a beautiful description. I think for me, one of the most exciting things of that, aren't we so lucky as a species that we have the ability to appreciate flavour that's that nuanced, that we're not just eating to live, but that we've got the time and the foresight. Like you said, one of the few things they say about humans is we have that ability to think about the future, rather than the now.
Yeah.
But it's incredible that we have such a broad palette, isn't it? It feels like we don't need it. We don't need it to be alive. You could just, put food in your body for energy. But I feel that we're so lucky that we can appreciate all of these different flavours and textures.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we're not kind of just surviving on carrion, are we? In roadkill, it's not something like that. But do you know what? I did think about this, and I thought I had the same view about aren't we lucky? But ultimately, as a human being, we kind of think we're top of the tree, and evolution. And yet when it comes to the realms of the senses, like being able to take in flavour, we're not that acute. We're still slightly, dullards. A shark can smell a drop of blood in the ocean from some distance away. You can't do that. I can't do that. Taste and flavour is where we have slightly more advanced, but we're limited. We can only categorise flavours by sweet, sour, bitter, savoury, and salt. Right? Back to the salt. Salt accounts for 1/5 of your overall engagement in flavour. You kind of know when you've got too much salt. Nobody taught you that. You know if there isn't enough and you adjust that. Nobody taught you that. It's almost innate, isn't it? Learning about flavour is innate, but from those 5 broad categories, then you can explode into lots of different ingredients and lots of different combination of those ingredients. I like to think about the fact that people say salt is the devil's ingredient, too much, and it's bad for your health. Of course it is. And I always come back with, without salt you die. And it's not a kind of very appetizing subject for this podcast, but it's true. It's balance, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah.
I was chatting to Rosalind from the London Cookery School, I think she's trained 40,000 people over the last, 30 years or something like that in cooking. But, she's the same. Salt's her favourite ingredient. She's like, she extols the virtues. It was like, she talked about almost like, wizardry and magic, the things that you can do with salt are of another realm, basically. She was so excited about it. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, we are saline creatures, water and salt. It's what we're, wobbling about inside us.
Totally.
We need some because it's getting near lunchtime.
Yeah.
Why is it, and this has changed in the last few years, that we've become much more interested in charcuterie? So it used to be you only had, kind of cured meats when you were on holiday and you went abroad, and now we've sort of brought it home. And now, as a restaurateur, I always wanted to buy local, but in the early days, certainly if I wanted to put a nice kind of, sharing charcuterie board on, I did always end up going over to Spain and to France.
Yeah.
Now it's been really exciting in the last few years. That's so much easier to resolve. You mentioned the fact that this is, multi-generation. Did we used to do it and lose it? Was it done in other countries because of the different kind of, weather and climate? And I don't know, why is it now a thing in Britain to produce it and it didn't used to be?
Well, I think we've always had fantastic produce.
Exactly. Some of the best. Yeah.
And
pigs and game.
It's only now that we're kind of applying the craft of curing and smoking charcuterie to those amazing products. I'm sure we did, but we kind of culturally became disassociated from the craft. Something happened whereby we thought, actually, they do it better over there. And Spain, Italy and France, Eastern Europe, those are the kind of places where we would go and look for those products because they traditionally carry on doing it. They haven't lost the ability. They've championed it. They've turned it into products which celebrate who they are culturally. I've got a mate who works in the Spanish government, and he works in the equivalent of the Department of Culture, although it's not called that. And under their remit, they go and randomly check the DNA in Iberico hams to be certain that it can be traced back to a small herd of Pata Negra Blackfoot pigs. And if it does not, they come down on that producer like a ton of bricks, because nobody's going to mess around with their ham because it's who they are. It's not just ham on a charcuterie plate. It's culturally who they are. It celebrates topography, terroir, craft, climate, history. It's a real kind of, it's something to be celebrated. Now, there's nobody we don't even have a national dish, but there's nobody really checking the DNA of fish and chips. It's kind of low on the scale. The other thing is that, again, I've got this perhaps over-romantic notion of the continent, but people celebrate regionality. You're from somewhere else in my country, and I'm from somewhere else in the same country. We make brilliant things in our place. So do you. We're not going to be on your back about you, banging on about how brilliant your stuff is, because we think it is something that's really important for the general whole country. We make brilliant stuff, you make brilliant stuff. We're poor at that in Britain. We're poor at celebrating what we're good at. Where we do it best, I think, is in the world of cheese.
I was going to say, I was chatting to Blue Vinny not long ago about this exact subject. So you're right. Cheese, it's a new thing though, relatively, isn't it? That we're getting better at.
What do you make? Oh, we make cheddar. Oh, we make Cheshire. Yeah, it's brilliant. and you make Yarg in Cornwall and Somerset Brie, and you start to think, actually, there's no shame in going, hey, we make great stuff because we recognise you make great stuff too. And that fixes it, I think, more in the place. It grounds it more. And I think charcuterie didn't have that. Yes, it's to do with high welfare. Yes, of course, ultimately it's to do with pasture. But with cheese, that's all it can be. There are very few ingredients: milk, salt, and what happens before the milk is turned into milk is deeply, deeply important. And that's why I think cheese has managed to do it, because it's fixed in a certain place. But, you know, charcuterie-wise, I guess we took our eye off the ball.
It's interesting, isn't it? The flip side of that tradition and history, I suppose, is, and this has come up with a few podcasts, William Curley about chocolate, Emily about cheese, certainly champagne, English sparkling wine. We what we do have, because we're not constrained by history, is we seem to be getting a reputation for innovation. So although we're late to the party, we're now learning new techniques. Sparkling wine's probably the easiest example to say, you know, they're so buried in the history of how to produce champagne in Champagne that now, from a taste perspective, in blind taste, you know, we're taking them on and we're winning some of the best taste awards because we can innovate. So I suppose there's a fine line between, and William Curley was kind of saying in chocolate world, you know, if he was in a little Belgian village making certain chocolates and he came up with some of the weird and wacky flavours that he now does, he'd probably be thrown off of the continent for being so revolutionary. Whereas in London, it's kind of welcomed because we've got such a broad range of cultures and history and stuff. So I guess, is there an argument to say that, because it feels bad if that means that people can then cheat, and actually the provenance of the food and what, you know, they stand by on the continent clearly means you can guarantee that product. It almost feels like, okay, we're starting from scratch in some way, but we do need to retrofit some of the same policies in the same way. I can't remember what the accreditation that Blue Vinny got, but they were given some sort of locality of cheese, so they are the only people who can make, you know, Dorset Blue Vinny. Yeah,
I think it's like a DPI. It's a designated product of a certain origin.
That rings a bell, yes.
Yeah, fixes it. Same as, you know, a lot of good ingredients can't. It doesn't mean to say that it means ultimately that you can't call it champagne. But, you know, I think it's there as a benchmark. I don't think it's there as a kind of selfish thing that you can't do it as good as us. And, you know, we've always, I think as a nation, we've been great innovators. I think that's one of the best things about being from where we are, because we're here from accident, really, aren't we? But, you know, fashion, music, science, industry, there's a massive history of being innovators. And they still have their crappy side of the food production on the continent too, you know. It's just that they kind of...
Yeah, they really do. Yeah.
I've
had a lot of bad meals in France.
Totally, right? Yeah. But they do kind of, you know, it's not necessarily to the fore.
Yeah.
But there's an energy, there's a movement. Whether it's a revolution, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a resurgence. Tapping into other people's knowledge, not necessarily just passing it off as your own, but adapting that and going, actually, you know, we can compete, we can make brilliant produce. It would be a poor drinking experience to go to a restaurant and say that all the red wines were from England. You know?
Yes.
It's not about internalizing too much. It's a part of...
Definitely, 100%. I'm laughing because my restaurant manager is French, and I remember that, you know, as far as he's concerned, absolutely you should go into a restaurant and all the wine should be from France, 100%. But we have educated him over the years that other wines and countries in the world are available. Just quickly, while we're on the difference between the two, something that comes up regularly in the UK is, and chatting to farmers, and I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, but we talk a lot about the fact that we've got some of the best animal welfare standards in the world in the UK. I mentioned to you earlier when we came and found this beautiful log cabin that I was in the Alps not long ago in Chamonix, and you go out there and actually you see these lovely animals wandering around in fields in the grass and creating beautiful produce. We talked then about Iberia pigs. Is it true? Do we have the best standards in the UK? Do you know? Or actually is this a bit of a myth we've created and Europe is equally as good at it? Or is it nuanced?
I think both. I think, you know, there are those kind of amazing elements of brilliant pasture, high welfare in Europe. I think we also have some of the highest welfare standards here, which are not just universally applied, but it's clear, it's not hidden. I think there's a huge amount of people doing amazing things about wanting to do the right thing. Of course, it's not in the majority, but it's very much accessible. And we touched on it earlier about having those kind of lines of accreditation, free range, red tractor, organic. And I suppose you and I are from a privileged position where we get to meet the producer. And as a consumer, you don't always get to meet the consumer, have a look and, see the whites of their eyes and go, oh, so you're doing this and doing that. And, working out whether or not it does make the grade. And so we're not necessarily governed by that. We can judge on what we see and what we experience. But, organic movement, slow food movement, independent artisan producers doing amazing things from the field all the way to the fork, supported by a massive amount of brilliant foodie professionals who want to do the right thing. I wouldn't say that we do it better. I wouldn't say that we do it more. I think it's perhaps more prominent because as a small set of countries, a small island, it looks more concentrated and I would just say that we have both sides of that, but I think more people are exposed to the good side.
Okay, interesting. You, just to finish off on those topics of dairy and charcuterie, you wrote a book on each under the River Cottage sort of guise, so people can deep dive into those hugely if they want to with your books. But is there a piece of charcuterie, and if it's bacon or not, but is there something that people at home should be doing? If they want to start with a simple cheese or start with a simple bit of curing, where's the easiest place? Where's the kind of like idiots, this can't go too wrong place to start?
Yeah. It's interesting because it's all really accessible. And, now I'm kind of often introduced as Steve Lamb, the ham and cheese guy. And I think, that's that'll do. That's okay. But, really easy to make simple bacon, really easy to make great hams, really easy to make fresh cheeses, fresh curds, ricotta, mozzarella, halloumi. It's just a matter of understanding that you're not, particularly with curing and smoking, taking something which is slightly shonky and turning it into something barely palatable. Both of these things, making cheese, you have to start with really good milk, really good meat, and with a simple layer of craft and understanding and a few simple rules, you will make something amazing. You will make an elevated version of what that original product was. And so, smoked trout, smoked cheese, soft cheeses, all of these things are really, really, really simple. And I have a slight aversion to kit and caboodle. I find it a little bit suffocating, a little bit too many shiny things in the kitchen, and I start to go, right, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. And you can do all of these things with basic items that you've already got in your domestic fridge.
So you have to take the fire alarm out of your house if you're smoking a trout, or?
Well, with the extraction unit on, you're okay.
You're right.
But, the other thing about this is I like to see smoking as a kind of outdoor pursuit.
Okay.
If you've got,
Gotcha.
right, if you've got a normal kettle barbecue, you've got the beginning of a hot and cold smoker. The difference between hot and cold smoking, other than temperature, is that hot smoking is cooking and flavouring with smoke. Cold smoking is flavouring with smoke, but preserving and drying.
Right. Okay. And I know there was one particular cheese. It sounded super simple. I don't know. I was reading last night, but it was literally, I think, was it you get some good quality yogurt, you put something in it.
Labna.
So go on. Can you just explain what this is? Because even I read it and went, oh man, I could do that. I could
know,
pull that off, no problem.
It's so easy, right? So labna, it's a drained yogurt cheese. So you get some really decent full fat yogurt and a cheesecloth or a piece of muslin, and you get about 500 millilitres of yogurt because that's the tub that it comes in. I put a sprinkle of salt in there. You needn't, you can just let it drain. But I stir in about a teaspoon of salt, agitates the yogurt, and then you put that into muslin, tie it at the top, hang it over your fridge or over a bowl, and the whey starts to drain out of the yogurt, which ultimately over a few hours or overnight leaves a curd, not too dissimilar from the texture of Borsan, or perhaps to some of the listeners, Philadelphia, if you want. It's got that kind of consistency. And it's delicious on toast. It's delicious on anything. But you can pimp it up as well. You can put herbs in it. You can put black pepper in it, garlic. See, in my house now, everybody knows what they're going to get for Christmas. They're going to get a little Kilner jar of labneh. They're going to get a little bit of bacon wrapped in wax paper. Potentially, they might get a homemade salami, and they're going to get another signed copy of my book, whether they like it or not.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, at least they know what's coming.
Yeah.
That's good, and that's great to hear. You can make the bacon as well. Do you have? You mentioned a YouTube channel earlier, but do you have videos where you show people how to do this as well, or is the best place buy the book?
Yeah, no, the book is there, and it's a great kind of supporting tool for anybody who wants to do it. But you can access, the videos on YouTube via River Cottage website also. But it's old knowledge really. It's nothing new. I'm kind of still learning. I just like the notion of doing something which, although you will always make something safe, it will kind of differ. I've got some brilliant products at home that we can consider happy accidents. And there's a sort of positive contingency with all of the things that I like in terms of food methods, whether it's making your own charcuterie, making your own dairy or cheese. I'm making my version of these things. I don't own the recipe for bacon, but I make my own bacon. You can make your own bacon following the simple rules, but there's this element of, okay, so I've got the rules down. Now I'm going to mess around with a few ingredients. I'm going to mess around with where I leave it. I'm going to mess around with the amount of time I leave it for. And these throw up really interesting, different, true artisan, bespoke to you ingredients. It makes it really vibrant.
We have so lost our way of this, or disconnect. There's this mystery around food now, isn't it? We buy it in the supermarket and we've got no idea even what it is, let alone how you make it. Yeah. Just a little bit of effort to make those few simple ones kind of opens up the door then to go, okay, right, I get it. And the more we can understand what's processed and what's not processed, because everything's kind of, if you've cooked it, it's been processed in some way. But if we can understand, how, what's real food and what's fake food, I suppose. Which brings me a little bit then, so coming to an end, people will be pleased to hear who are listening probably. But where do we go? So we touched on this before we started, that the more I've looked into the food chain, the more I've become, on one side, depressed and sort of aware of some of the bad stuff that's going on and some of the compromises that have been made because of speed and because of price and because we spend so much less now of our disposable income on food. But you mentioned this, that at the end of the day we're in a very privileged position. We could spend a little bit more on food if we want to. I can't work out where the sweet spot is between the balance, I suppose, of the impact on the environment, on animal welfare, on nutrition and all this kind of stuff. How do you see the world? Is it lots of artisan little places, River Cottage? Are we going back in time to sort of little small holdings, or are we going to get to a point where we nail how to do this on a bigger, grander scale, but without the environmental impact? If you've got young kids, if you look 10, 20 years into the future, how do you see the world around food and drink?
Well, it's through an element of hope and optimism, as I think that's what it requires. If you just take where we currently are in the world in general, we were talking earlier about how you could view it as spiraling into madness, and in the food world in particular, things have gone quite badly wrong. But then, you and I, eternal optimists, we decided we'd say it was a pendulum, didn't we? And things go badly wrong and you try and affect it and bring it back. And I look at, the youth and I think, oh my God, they are mostly super proactive and doing brilliant things and not putting us to shame, but I think it's going in a good way. All right. I see that through a few years of pain, that we will start to learn the balance between wildlife and farming and using farming and doing it in a sustainable way that produces great results but doesn't take away from the earth. I think, biodiversity, sustainability, big words. I think these will become the maxims of how we judge how well people are doing. Currently, there's a labeling system on food which tells you about calories and salt and ingredients. Ultimately, I think there should be a traffic light system on clothing, on food, on anything that we buy that shows the impact it has had on the earth in order to get that product on the shelf. And when that kind of opens up, people will be able to go, blimey, as nice and as fashionable as that jacket is, I would be an idiot to buy it. And it would become less removed. I think everybody would be able to tap into the knowledge of their own actions and see it makes a kind of, it's still to kind of act as an individual or local, and it will have an impact. I was listening to a really cool guy over the weekend, a guy called Tony Juniper from Natural England. And he talked about how if you see the world as a kind of patchwork as opposed to this big entity, then you start to make connections. And those connections have a bigger impact. It's about creating small communities that are connected further afield. And I think that, it will be more plant-based, our diet. I think there'll be proteins from different areas. And I know there's lots of work on eating insects. I just think that, I hope it doesn't go too far. I think it will be at the point where it's understood whether you eat a plant-based diet or, a diet that has some meat in it, that you have to have both of those systems working symbiotically in order for them to produce the best. And that leaves you with the ability of making the choice of what your diet is, because you've got the choice of brilliant things that don't necessarily railroad us into a food and environmental disaster.
Perfect. Good answer. And something that jumps out then is when you talk about, the nuances of meat and plant, I suppose, is that there's always extremes, isn't there? Somewhere in the middle, the kind of flexitarian approach. Because even with plant-based food, what upsets me now is we always, go, the pendulum sometimes goes too far, and all of a sudden we're making these fake kind of, pretend meat products.
Yeah.
We're making these non-meat burgers, and we're making them all in a factory somewhere in the world made of weird and wonderful things, and then we're shipping them around the world, and you kind of go, oh, look, we did that. That's not the solution. The solution was somewhere where you just, I don't know, replace half of the meat in your beef burger with some mushrooms or some lentils or something that changes it, or take it out completely but make a burger out of whole food, again, that we spoke about earlier. But the solution isn't, just start making weird and wonderful stuff in a factory. I worry sometimes with the government that they so end up over-regulating. They talk about putting calories on everything and well-intentioned a lot of the time, but a chef in a kitchen making proper food out of whole ingredients will use a little bit more salt, or might use a little bit more butter, or might add some extra carrots or some extra mushrooms, and he's tweaking that dish as he's tasting it to make it the right balance. But at the same time, he can't therefore be constantly adjusting the pre-printed nutritional value, calorific content, and you end up to the point where food is made in a factory, because that's the only place where you can completely make it perfect and regulate it. And you think you start with the right intentions, but we come up with the wrong solution all too often. Is there any, I guess my question off that, is there anything the government can do to fast track this change that we need in food, do you think, at the moment?
Yeah, they need to sort their shit out. They need to start. Yeah, honestly, they need to start. Yeah, they need to focus. Okay. They need to focus, and they need to listen. And I think, there's a voice. There is a collective voice, which I think that I take great positivity in knowing that there is a whole kind of community of people who will challenge now and will not part for it. And I don't condone sort of aggravated violence in any kind of campaigning way, but I love this kind of notion of, yes, we'll do our version of putting on our yellow vests. We will stand together and make sure that we're listened to. And I think that is ultimately any government needs to do that.
Yeah, yoga on a bridge, hypothetically, might be a nicer approach than having a fight, for example. I think that's what they're doing in London today. I think is
that right?
Yeah, let's it's Extinction Rebellion, I guess, and all the stuff,
Of
which
course,
I do think does have this overwhelming kind of public movement of going, we probably don't want to bring the city to a standstill, and we don't want to cause people to have a rubbish day, but fundamentally we do want you to wake up and realise that there's an issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I'm age 82 or 85 and being carted away and arrested because I'm doing the right thing,
exactly,
then I'd be happy with that, and I'd expect you to pay my bail.
So one of the ways was we talk about government. So one of the ways that River Cottage sort of seems to get its voice out there is, again, we touched on this very briefly earlier about the fact you've got the canteens, kitchens, kind of high street restaurants, I suppose. I've got to ask, because I'm in hospitality, so many people use that. They use their fame or their knowledge to roll out hundreds of those buggers. You don't have many. How many restaurants? Three. So why have you only got 3? Why have you not rolled out a lot? And what's the objective of having them? Is it about getting your message out there, or is it just because you were worried that people were hungry?
I think that the main decision was about going to places that had vibrant foodie communities and tapping into that and being able to showcase what was really going on well there, and then applying the River Cottage-ness of the kind of good food experience, which celebrated local, seasonal, organic, free-range, wild food. And then there must have been a business decision, which I wasn't party to, and that's not really my forte, that said, now these areas have a high footfall of people and they have good high streets, and wouldn't it be interesting to see if we can find a place which got River Cottage ethos and brand out there and tapped into that other world of the kind of classic restaurant trade. And there's no, I don't think, it's not really my forte or my place to say. I don't think there is the notion of building those up and building an empire. If you kind of look at the recent stories of people trying to do that, you'd run a million miles away from it. I think it's quite difficult to make a success of that. Being a restaurateur is difficult, right? But it's currently working to that level, and again, don't forget, we've got this kind of other element of being able to be present in other venues other than the high street, which is a different particular section of the business, without too much, with a balanced kind of emphasis on whether it's on your shoulders or not. Going into partnership with somebody kind of makes that a little bit easier. And Winchester, Bristol and Axminster are the locations where we've got those kitchens. And I think they're doing okay.
It's refreshing to see, with the opportunity of TV and the brand and all that you do. All too often, money comes knocking at the door. Big investors want to invest and grow the business, and it looks like you guys from the outside are maintaining that kind of integrity and authenticity by going, well, you know what, we don't want to be huge. You've never over commercialized the River Cottage brand. You've got a lot of books, but you don't bring out new ones every 6 months. You have a classic. This one's about preserves. This one's about dairy. This one's about meat. Whatever it might be, which is brilliant. Do you think that's a consciousness? I suppose, what's the future for River Cottage? What's the legacy? What are you trying to build here? Because it doesn't look like it's about global domination.
Well, I think it's about creating a business which is about more than just profit. Of course, the business has to be profitable and it needs to be around. It needs to be a platform for people to come and learn all about, the good things that food and hospitality and well-being has to offer. We don't always get it right either. It's not a kind of the holy grail of doing it the right way. But it's important to kind of say and do and campaign those things that you do on television, and then make sure that you deliver that in the kitchen at HQ or at one of the venues. You know, you've got to be across it. And if you're not across it, that's when things go wrong. And I guess in terms of the early days at River Cottage, when everybody did everything, and the notion of having somebody in HR or a finance director was laughable, you know. But now there are people within industry that have had experience outside of the River Cottage organic bubble that are able to apply business acumen. And I think that's necessary. So as long as it doesn't affect the kind of culture, it doesn't affect the outcome or the intention, you know, let's hope it doesn't turn it into this kind of corporation, although B Corp would be really cool, have a different connotation altogether. And it still has, you know, still looks internally at how the lives or the working lives of the staff that have kind of come into River Cottage, how it affects them. As long as there's a guardianship over that, I think then wherever it goes would be a kind of interesting ride.
Yeah, and it'll maintain that integrity. I mentioned again earlier before we started, but I'm going to see Guy this afternoon from Riverford, and he went through that dilemma. I think he was getting offered big money to roll out, you know, grow bigger and grow the brand. He had some very eloquent wording. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about the fact he'd rather sell his daughter to a brothel than take the money that was being offered and grow the business in the way he said. And now he's gone employee owned, basically. So he gave 75% of the business, I think, to his employees to make sure that custodianship, that guardianship of what they stand for and the integrity that they stand for was sustained, which seems like a decent solution. Basically.
Yeah. River Cottage don't do that, but there's a kind of, you know, you buy into what you're trying to maintain.
Yeah, and maybe one day, like you say, the B Corp or the employee owned. So your role has become multifaceted. You do all sorts of stuff. Even you don't know what your job description or job title is. But out of everything that you do on a day-to-day basis now, what's your favourite bit? What gives you the most reward?
So I like teaching, and I teach in several places as well as River Cottage. That's something, making that direct connection and kind of seeing people go, oh, bloody hell, I can do that. And, you know, my inbox is full of pictures of mouldy meat from all over the world of people who've tried to make stuff and they say, is this going to kill my other half? And I respond, but do you want it to? Because it looks great to me. It will kill them if you hit them over the back of the head with it. So there's that immediate thing with teaching. I particularly like working with a couple of brands that I can apply what I learned to their business, and it kind of has a meaning. There's a currency that River Cottage allows you to then spend with other people. I like working with people outside of the River Cottage bubble because it's challenging, and you know, they've gone a particular route, and there's some great people that I can work with as well, and being part of River Cottage has afforded me that basically that I'm unmanageable, and they kind of go, yes, away you go. Excellent. You know, you can leave the county and work with other brands, and I find that exciting. And one of the nicest or the most interesting aspects for me is I quite often find myself hosting events, things like taste food festivals or other festivals, and you know, I'm the person facilitating the other person on stage. So, you know, it's very rare that I stand and do a cookery demo or a smoking curing demo. I like to be the person holding the mic, interviewing the person on stage doing that. I kind of have found myself doing that more and more often.
You've got a great reputation for that, by the way, because I remember chatting to Mark Hicks just before you were doing his festival a little while ago. So I presume it all went well, but he mentioned the fact that, you're particularly good at kind of keeping him on order on stage and kind of, being the host for the most.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody keeps him in order.
No,
he's a maverick. He's a maverick, but you know, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. But I love that. I love that. That gene is missing from me, Mark, that most people have about what? You want me to stand up in front of a load of people and
Yeah.
just chat what's in your head?
Yeah, dangerous.
And but I love that.
Yeah, no, likewise.
I love that, and I love. Yeah, of course you do. You do it really well. Teasing the information out of somebody else, and it's kind of, it's less of an ego thing, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah.
I know some stuff. I know you know loads of stuff. Let's get that out in the open. So these folks.
Yep. Well, as the role of the restaurateur, and again, I said this to you earlier, but somebody on the phone I was with earlier, actually in the car, and I was chatting about, we have such a lovely job because all we've got to do is find these amazing producers and these people who make these wonderful ingredients, and all we do really is represent them, and we tease out a little bit extra, and we cut the beautiful tomatoes in half and drizzle them with a bit of olive oil and salt and some basil. Really, just don't screw up beautiful ingredients. And I think when you're interviewing, it's the same thing. It's like a DJ, isn't it? He's just a filler between the music. If you get the right guests, you meet the right people, then our job is brilliant. So if you can be on stage with somebody like Mark and he can be doing his thing and doing his craft and you can help bring it to life, then that's lovely. So
yeah,
thank you so much. I've stolen so much of your time. I'm very grateful for you sparing it. If people want to follow your story personally or the River Cottage story, is there a particularly good channel? Are you prolific on any particular social media?
I'm across Twitter and Instagram, and my handle is @lambposts. I'm Stephen Lamb, and I post things across those channels. I still quite like that.
I like that. It's not because you put lamb through the post. I get it. Yeah,
no. It's not a meat box scheme.
I like the fact that when I text, who was it, James from Cabrito Goats the other day, and he said he was in the car with you, and I was like, no way, the lamb man and the goat man both in the same car, the same together.
Yeah,
so,
we should really travel together.
You should. You should just all go. Yeah. Lamb and goat, they go well together. Yeah.
And I would point people towards rivercottage.net. Anybody who wants to come and experience any of the great classes there or dining events, and they have a busy schedule throughout the year. You can just tap in, and I'm there for about 30% of my working life. And I also teach at Leiths and Vale House and Season. These are, up and down the country. So if you're geographically challenged to get to River Cottage, you can find me there at some point in the year.
You're out on the road.
Yeah.
Great. Well, look, I've loved having River Cottage running aside my life. I don't know, they just feel like such a nice, familiar brand. It feels like they've been a force for good for the last 2 decades. They feel like they've learned, at the same time as I've been learning, and it just feels comfortable. And I'm really excited. I hope that carries on for the next 20 years. And as I continue to learn, River Cottage does and continues to do good stuff. But thanks for what you've done, your part, and it's been great. And we'll touch base as the story evolves, I hope.
Yeah, great. Let's meet again in 20 years' time.
Perfect.
Let's do an anniversary podcast.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I haven't got much hair left. With a bit of luck, yours will at least be grey, even if you have so much of it, so that I won't feel so jealous. But see you in 20 years.
Yeah, see you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast, and remember that on the website humansofhospitality.co.uk every week we put on some show notes and some links through to the various websites or social media that are mentioned, and we also do a nice little breakdown of that week's conversations into specific topics, so you can jump through the podcast and just listen to some of the highlights if you wish. If you've not done so already, if you could leave us a review on iTunes or one of the other podcast players of your choice, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much, and we'll be out with another episode next Monday.